This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
The X-Zone radio and TV show is largely an opinion talk show. All opinions, comments, or statements of fact expressed by Rob McConnell's guests are strictly their own and are not to be construed as those of the X-Zone radio and TV show or in any manner endorsed by Rob McConnell, Relmar McConnell Media Company, Talkstar Radio Network, its affiliated stations, or employees.
X-Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
It's the time of the season when love runs high. In this time, give it to me easy. And let me try with pleasured hands to take you in this time to promised lands, to show you everyone. It's the time of the season for loving.
Welcome back to the X-Zone. My name is Rob McConnell, and we're coming to you live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network. Our toll-free number is 1-877-528-8255. Email xzone@talkstarradio.com. On MSN Messenger, talkstarradio@hotmail.com, and our two websites, www.xzonetv.com. That's where you can watch and listen to the show live from our studios in Hamilton, and www.xzoneradio.com is our main website. Richard Salva is my special guest this hour. He is a minister and a 30-year expert on past lives. He has lectured widely on yoga philosophy, reincarnation, and history in the United States and in Europe. His recent book, Soul Journey from Lincoln to Lindbergh, has received 5 stars from Forward Clarion Reviews and the Midwest Book Review. To learn more about a special offer related to Richard's book, visit his website at www.lincolnreincarnation.com. And Richard Salva, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice talking to you, Richard. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Yes, about 10 years ago, I was in between writing projects, and as a minister and a spiritual person, I decided to open myself up to the universe to ask for some guidance and prayers. So as I was seated on the airplane, and I opened myself up, within less than a minute's time, the idea for this book came to me. And it's actually based on a statement by a great master of yoga who said, his name was Paramahansa Yogananda. Now, many people are familiar with Yogananda's photograph because it's on the Sgt. Pepper album.
Mm-hmm.
He influenced the Beatles and Elvis Presley and many millions of people throughout the world. But about 60 years ago, Yogananda said that Abraham Lincoln had been an advanced Himalayan yogi in a past life, and that he was reborn as Charles Lindbergh. And this thought came to me while I was on that airplane. Why don't you research these two men? I mean, here are two men whose lives have been so deeply chronicled that if there were evidence of reincarnation, past lives, karma, and so on between them, that should be possible to find it. And also at that point, I had already spent more than 20 years studying and practicing the teachings of Himalayan yogis. So if there were evidence, too, of a past life immersion in the deeper teachings of yoga, it should be possible for me to spot them. And, Rob, going into this, I didn't know what I would find. I thought I might find a few interesting connections. But I was overwhelmed by the quality and quantity of evidence there was of connections between the two men. I ended up discovering nearly 500 fascinating similarities and connections between Abraham Lincoln and Charles Lindbergh, more than 200 between Abraham Lincoln and the ancient spiritual science of yoga, and more than 100 between Charles Lindbergh and the path of yoga. And these connections aren't just the regular sort of connections that everyone has, like for you and I, that we both like pizza and the Beatles or something like that. But mental obsessions, physical habits, social preferences, it even ranged into the spiritual. In fact, the second half of my book shows how closely aligned they were, which is something that probably most people wouldn't expect, that Abraham Lincoln and Charles Lindbergh, when you look at their own daily habits, how closely aligned they were actually spiritually.
All right, Richard, please stand by. You and I have to take a commercial break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Richard Salva is our special guest, X-Zone Nation. www.lincolnreincarnation.com. The name of Richard's new book is entitled, all right, do you have your pencils and paper ready? You do? That's fine, because here we go. Soul Journey from Lincoln to Lindbergh. And once again, the website is www.lincolnreincarnation.com. And Richard Salva and I will be back on the other side of this 2-minute commercial break as the X-Zone continues on the Talkstar Radio Network. 1-877-528-8255 is toll free. Our email address, xzone@talkstarradio.com. Now, we've received a number of calls from listeners around the world about William Federer. We ran out of time last night with William. So William Federer will be back tomorrow night in hour number 3. That is 9 to 10 Pacific, to finish off talking about his new book, all about Islam. My name's Rob McConnell. This is the X-Zone, and I'll be back with our special guest this hour, Richard Salva, right on the other side of this 2-minute break as we continue live and around the world from our Hamilton, Ontario.
Nita Hickok is an expert in exorcisms, psychic warfare, soul healing, angelology, soul retrieval, demonology, energy healing, long-distance healing, astral healing, and much more. Nita is an interfaith minister because she believes all gods and goddesses are valid and that they are part of one divine force that is incomprehensible to us who are incarnated upon this earth. Nita has been doing astral healing, distant healing, spirit release, exorcism, house cleansing and blessings, soul restoring and revival, psychic vampire removal and curse removal, and much more for over 40 years. For more information or to contact Nita Hickok, visit her website at www.astralhealer.com. That's www.astralhealer.com.
Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.
In the year 2525, if man is still alive, if woman can survive, they may find. In the year 3535.
Richard Salva is our very special guest. He's the author of Soul Journey. And Richard, I was wondering if anything unusual happened while you were researching this book.
Yes. In fact, it was rather fascinating that I would be reading about Abraham Lincoln and in a book, in a biography of him, one of the history books, and it would give me some detail about him, one of his quirks or one of his habits or so on. And already in my research on Lindbergh, it would make me wonder if perhaps there was a connection, a similarity in the life of Lindbergh. And the next day I would be in a bookstore or a library, and I would see a book and I would just feel compelled to pull it off the shelf. And it might not have been a book specifically about Lindbergh per se, but something would compel me to pull it off the shelf and open it. And whenever I did that, I would find on the exact same page that I opened to the answer to the question I was looking for. And this happened not only once, but over and over again. It was really quite fascinating.
Richard, did you visit any places made famous by their association with Lincoln or Lindbergh?
Yes, actually, I made a trip to Illinois, to the heartland, to the land of Lincoln, and went to Springfield, which was Abraham Lincoln's hometown. And as a yogi, as somebody who meditates for hours every day and has done so for over 30 years now, I've become sensitive to energies. If I would go to, say, Assisi, I would feel in a certain spot St. Francis's energy, and it would be very uplifting, and it would be very beautiful. And then I would go down the road and feel St. Clair's energy, and it would also be uplifting, but in a different way. So I decided to make this trip because I wanted to really feel, I didn't want to just have it a mental thing, that I was seeing all these connections which were quite fascinating. I wanted to feel the connection between the two men. So I went to Springfield, and I went to Lincoln's home, which is a park site. You can go there and you can enter, and a park employee will take you around. Also to his law office. There was a beautiful, beautiful energy there. There's like a light shining through there, and you can understand that because Lincoln was in charge of that law office. He was a senior partner of the law office of Lincoln and Herndon, and pretty much his political goals were formed there, and his life mission was clarified there, so you can really feel that light there. And I also went down the road from Springfield to a small frontier town of New Salem where Lincoln got his legs as a young man, where he got his first job as a postmaster, which strangely enough, Lindbergh used to fly over where Lindbergh was postmaster, and he was delivering the airmail, Lindbergh was. But anyway, I felt Lincoln's energy there, and it was very beautiful. I could feel what Yogananda had said, that he was an advanced spiritual soul, that he'd been a Himalayan yogi in a past life. And it was just a beautiful energy. It was like a light. The only thing was there was this sadness that I could feel. You could see this melancholy in the photographs of Lincoln. He was well known for his melancholy, and you could feel that, too, if you're sensitive, if you go to the places where he lived. And I highly recommend that people who are sensitive go there and meditate there. But the next day I took a plane to Minnesota, and I drove up to central Minnesota to a town called Little Falls. And this is where Lindbergh had his home when he was a young boy. And when I set foot on the land where Charles Lindbergh had lived and played as a young boy, my knees almost buckled because I felt the same exact energy that I felt the day before at the Lincoln sites. Only here, it was interesting. It was as if the sadness that I had felt, the melancholy that I had felt at the Lincoln sites was gone. And the only way that I can explain it was that all the selfless acts that Lincoln had done during his lifetime had helped to free him from whatever karma it was that had made him suffer from melancholy during that life. Because for Lindbergh, nothing really seemed to bother him. He was able to keep his mind and his spirit on a fairly even keel throughout his life, no matter what happened.
What did writing Soul Journey teach you about reincarnation, Richard?
Oh, it taught me a great deal. You know, Rob, before writing this book, I had my own experiences of reincarnation. In fact, like for the last 5 years before I started this book, I spent almost on a daily basis having these experiences that would just kind of overwhelm me and overpower me, and it taught me a lot about reincarnation and karma. For instance, I went to a battlefield in Europe, and while I sat there on the battlefield while these sheep nudged me, because it's a sheep meadow now, I could see the battle happening before my eyes as if superimposed on the landscape. I never had an experience like that before or since, but it was a very powerful one. And I really had a deep sense that I'd actually been there at that battle. It wasn't someone else's experience. It was my own experience in a past life. So I'd had these sort of experiences, and I believed in reincarnation for a long time. But when I worked on this book, there were so many connections and so many aspects of their lives. It was almost like the same lifetime with a little bit of a gap in between the two. That Lindbergh helped to finish up much of the karma, much of the things that Lincoln had started in his lifetime. And he also helped to kind of free him a lot, because for Abraham Lincoln, he had visions, even as a young boy, of what he would do in his life. And so he didn't have a lot of freedom to just do whatever he wanted, whereas Lindbergh had the opposite. He had so much freedom that he could just travel all around the world. He chose a vocation that helped him to do what was something that was near and dear to his heart, and that was also a habit of Abraham Lincoln's, which was cutting-edge transportation. And so you see these sort of connections going between the two lives, and they crisscross so much that just studying them and just working on this book just taught me a great deal about reincarnation. And I'm told by people who read it that they also learn about their own past lives while reading it.
Tell me, what evidence did you find that Abraham Lincoln's spirit survived his assassination?
Yes, well, one of the things that Yogananda used to say was that the thoughts that we hold on the last day of our lives are very important and can have a big impact on our next life. And, when I read the chronicles of the interviews with Mary Todd Lincoln, for instance, Abraham and Mary went for a ride from the White House before he went to Ford's Theater where he was assassinated. And they talked about their lives, and Abe said to Mary, we've gone through a lot, but I'd really like to get back to Illinois after the second term of office is over. This war will be over, and we'll be able to enjoy ourselves like before. He was really pining for the Midwest. He was pining for the prairie lands. He was pining for the experience he had of that home in Springfield and returning to it. But, of course, within a few hours, he was away from the world, and he wasn't able to experience that. But, when you have a desire like that, especially at the end of your life, it does have an impact on your next life. And we see in the life of Charles Lindbergh, before he flew the Atlantic, his job was, as I mentioned, he was carrying airmail. And where was he carrying it? Well, he was flying from St. Louis to Chicago, and he helped to devise this mail route that went through Springfield, and went through Peoria, it went through towns that Lincoln was deeply familiar with. And so almost on a daily basis, Charles Lindbergh was gazing from above like an angel riding a cloud at the land that Lincoln had deeply missed on the last day of his life. So there's just one example, but there are numerous examples of things that Lincoln had said and wanted to do, especially in the last day of his life, like traveling through Europe, seeing Jerusalem, and so on, that Charles Lindbergh was able to fulfill those desires.
How many connections did you find between Lindbergh and Lincoln again?
Yes, as I mentioned, there were nearly 500 of them, which was just extraordinary. And Rob, for anyone who writes a book like this, you can't really put everything that you find into the book.
No.
Oftentimes I would find connections that were similar to other connections, so I would just leave them out. I tried to put the best of what I found in the book. But, there was even a great deal more, and in fact, I'm looking at it. I've got this Lincoln and Lindbergh library, and there's sticky notes sticking out of all the books of things that I just didn't think would fit into the book. Either was too unusual or didn't seem to fit for one reason or another. But so there was even a lot more than that. So I mentioned that for many people, when you're reading this, as you go along, by the end of the book, you say, well, you really start to see the old Abe just sort of coming out of the life of Lindbergh, and you can see his stovepipe hat, and you see his beard, and so on like that. But for me, since there's so much that I didn't put in the book that I remembered finding, for me, I could see every single wrinkle and the wart on his cheek, every little detail there. It really became a real powerful connection for me.
Now, you say that your book offers a vicarious experience of reincarnation. What do you mean by that?
Well, when you read about these many connections, it goes in depth into both men's lives. And this is the first study that does so. there are many studies that point out a few connections between individuals and try to make an argument that perhaps this might be the case of reincarnation, and perhaps some of them are true. But in this instance, it goes so deeply into their lives and shows so many, how pretty much everything that defines an individual, everything, well, we know you because you always do this. You can find a connection between Lincoln and Lindbergh. And because of that, what you start to see when you're reading this book, and what I experienced while writing this book, is you start to see the connections in your own life. You start to see those aspects of yourself that you came in with, that you've always been this way even since you were a child, that you always tended to react this way to this particular situation or set of circumstances. And and the senses of deja vu when we've gone to places we've never been before, and suddenly everything there seems so really familiar. Or you meet somebody that you for the first time, and it's like you've always known them, and you just feel like, this must be, that's why people start talking about soulmates, because it's not just, it doesn't even have to be a male-female thing or a relationship-oriented thing. It could just be a friend. And you could go to the other side of the world and run into them on some sort of tour, and you just feel like, gee, this person is like my dearest friend, and I feel like I've known them forever. But when you start tying all those together, then you really start to get a vicarious sense of experiencing reincarnation through the lives of Lincoln and Lindbergh.
Richard, please stand by. We have to take our news break at the bottom of the hour. Richard Salva is our very special guest, and we're talking about Richard's new book entitled Soul Journey. It's available at his website at www.lincolnreincarnation.com. 1-877-528-8255 is toll-free throughout the U.S., Canada, Alaska, and Hawaii. My email address is xzone@talkstarradio.com. On MSN Messenger, talkstarradio@hotmail.com, and our two websites, www.xzonetv.com. That's where you can watch and listen to the show live from our studio in Hamilton, Ontario, and our main website, www.xzoneradio.com. I'll be back on the other side of the news. Don't go away. What if someone told you you could live to be 120? Would you believe him? What if he told you the Bible guaranteed it? All you needed to do was follow his rules and buy his products. Would you do it? What if you invested 20 years of your life in him? What if he tested his substances on your child? What if your child became brain damaged as a result? Meet Dr. Tyler Belknap, a fast-talking Texas admin turned health guru. At the helm of a vast health food and supplement empire, he has established himself as the authority on nutrition and longevity. But what his followers don't know is that his products are laced with bizarre psychoactive substances from genetically modified plants developed in his very own secret lab. No wonder his customers can't stop using them. Tyler Belknap will stop at nothing to keep his edge in the market, even if it means experimenting on children. Chasing 120, a story of food, faith, fraud, and the pursuit of longevity, a novel from the pen of political cartoonist Monty Wolverton, is an easy and entertaining read full of rich characters and intrigue. It hits home in a world filled with all kind of hucksterism and offers a glimpse of what can happen when GMO technology falls into the wrong hands. Chasing 120 by Monty Wolverton. Get your copy today at www.ptm.org/120 or on Amazon.com. The ability to access the knowledge of the universe is much easier for us to access than we may believe. Brad Johnson, conscious matrix communicator, is one of these unique individuals who is able to access a strong connection to the universal mind. Through his connection, Brad has assisted thousands of clients from all over the world through natural intuitive assistance. The intuitive information received is vast, covering a wide range of subjects. Brad's innate ability includes being able to access one's own universal matrix to help them realize their potential to create a life of profound greatness. One-on-one private sessions with Brad Johnson are available to anyone from around the world. Brad is also a proficiently trained psychic, Akashic Records reader, an online spiritual teacher, founder of his own unique and powerful healing system, Body Regeneration Healing, as well as a professional conscious channeler in communication with his own higher self-consciousness known as Adronis. For more information or to book a service appointment with Brad Johnson, visit his website at www.consciousmatrix.com. That's www.consciousmatrix.com.
Hi, this is Eric Rawls of Cosmoverse.com, and you're listening to Rob McConnell in the X Zone.
Hi, this is Blade Runner, and you are listening to Canada's #1 paranormal radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Hi, I'm Laura Sabrin of Feast to Fields Organic Vineyard in Jordan, and you're listening to Canada's #1 paranormal radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Hi, my name is Lady Ashley, the White Witch of Niagara-on-the-Lake, and you're listening to Canada's #1 paranormal talk radio show, The X Zone, with Rob McConnell.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
Every morning just to keep a job, I gotta find my way through the hustle and mob. Sounds of the city pounding in my brain, while another day goes down the drain. But it's a 5 o'clock world when the whistle blows. No one owns a piece of my time, and there's a 5 o'clock for me inside my clothes, thinking that the world looks fine.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. This portion of the X Zone is being brought to you by Ken Klein Productions, bringing mysteries into the light of day. www.kenkleintv.com and Technon, the Science of Survival. When danger strikes, are you prepared? Their website, www.technonllc.com. Richard Salva is my special guest. We're talking about Richard's book. It's called Soul Journey from Lincoln to Lindbergh, and his website is www.lincolnreincarnation.com. What is karma, Richard?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it? I think many people mistakenly believe that karma means punishment. You hear people using it on reality shows like Survivor or the Amazing Race, for instance, and you say, oh, so-and-so is really going to get their karma back after having done something or other. But, you know, the word karma literally means action, and it's the spiritual counterpart to Newton's third law of motion, which says that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So for whatever we put out will come back to us, either positive or negative, and there's no thought of punishment behind it. It's just an impersonal teaching tool of the universe. It's like if you put your hand, for instance, on a burning stove, the stove doesn't want to hurt you, and the laws of physics don't want to hurt you, but if you were to leave your hand on that stove, you would destroy your hand. And in the same way, in a spiritual sense, if whenever we reach out and whack somebody, we get whacked in return, sooner or later. And through this, we learn the right way to behave. But we see the law of karma functioning in the lives of Lincoln and Lindbergh. Just to give you one quick example.
Sure.
Abraham Lincoln was invited by his father when his dad was on his deathbed to come visit him. But Lincoln didn't go. He didn't have a very good connection with his dad, and he wrote to him and he said, you know, if we were to meet now, things might not go so well, but I leave you in the hands of our Heavenly Father. And so instead of going to visit his dad when he was dying, he wrote him a letter. And Charles Lindbergh, on the other hand, had a very different connection with his father. He had a very loving father. They were very close, actually. And when Lindbergh's father was dying, Lindbergh wanted to be able to go, but circumstances made it impossible for him to do so. He was in the Army, and he couldn't leave. So the best that he would be able to do would be to write a letter. And this is how the karmic law teaches us, that it teaches us how important it can be when someone is in that sort of state to go visit them. You have those sort of experiences over and over in a number of lifetimes, and then we learn that lesson and we move on from that to the next lesson.
All right, Richard, did Lincoln and Lindbergh marry the same woman?
That's a good question, too. You might think so. There are a number, actually, of similarities between Mary Todd Lincoln and Anne Morrow Lindbergh, not the least of which is that they both came from prominent families, and therefore they each went in public by these three names. They were both about a foot shorter than their husbands, and there are a few other connections too. They both spoke French, for instance. But if you look at their personalities, in depth into the person, you start to see a real dichotomy between Mary Todd and between Anne Morrow. There doesn't really seem to be a connection there. Just to give you one example, Mary used to just speak to complete strangers about really in-depth things in her life, things that most people would hold to their chest. She would just share with others, whereas Anne Morrow was much more quiet, and she didn't really tend to share those sort of things, even sometimes with her own family. And when you have this sort of a difference in personality, you have to say, well, this doesn't really seem like an instance of reincarnation. But the fascinating thing is that there was a young woman in Abraham Lincoln's life when he was a young man who had the same name. Her name was Anne Rutledge, as Anne Morrow. She shared many of the personality traits of Anne Morrow. And Lincoln was engaged to be married to this young woman when he was 26 and she was 22. And Lindbergh got engaged to Anne Morrow when he was 26 and she was 22. Lincoln never ended up marrying this young woman because she died. And in fact, Lincoln's law partner, Herndon, states that this was the reason for Lincoln's melancholy, that when this young woman who he felt so close to passed away, that he carried that grief with him throughout the rest of his life. So you see here a possibility of star-crossed lovers coming back together again in their next lifetime.
All right, but where do we draw the line between coincidence and reincarnation? What separates the two?
I think there are many coincidences in life, and that's a question that each of us has to answer for ourselves. For me, having worked on this book and seeing so much that covers so many aspects of life, it really seems like a powerful evidence that reincarnation is real. And I think if you just have a handful of connections between two people, that would really be hard to say for sure whether that could be a case of reincarnation. One of those connections that seem to pop up in people's minds are the fascinating similarities between the assassination of Abraham Lincoln and the assassination of JFK. And but when I look at those connections, and I've studied them just out of interest, I've noticed that most of those are coincidental. Most of them are superficial. The number of letters in the vice president's name, and the fact that one assassin went from a warehouse to a theater, and one went from a theater to a warehouse, and different things like that that don't really seem to have much meaning to them, but are very interesting. For me, it's almost like a time warp from one century to the next, or perhaps a national karma that needed to be played out again. Some lesson for our country to learn. I don't know. It's a tough thing for the soul, the person who has to go through that lesson. But, it really is something that each person has to decide for themselves.
All right. In the case of Lindbergh and President Lincoln, when they are reborn or reincarnated, would they have any physical characteristics that would...
Yes, well, sometimes often we carry these characteristics with us because we get used to a certain body type, for instance. You look into a mirror and you see a face for 70 years. It's mostly the same, changes as we grow older, but a lot of it is so similar there. When our souls reincarnate, Yogananda said that when the conception happens, when the sperm and ovum unite, that there's a flash in the ether. And then every soul that is in tune with that flash, that has some karma with those parents, some karma with that family, some
Right.
karma that needs to be fulfilled in a lifetime that would start right at that point, gravitate very quickly to that flash. And those who win that race are you and I. We won the race, and so we're in these physical bodies. I'm sorry, what was the question again? Go back to.
Would Lincoln and Lindbergh share any of the same physical characteristics or traits?
Yes. So when the soul enters that womb in that physical body, it's the body starts at the base of the brain at the medulla oblongata and goes up from that, and that's the seat of the ego. And it's the soul that directs the forming of that physical body. And many traits that it's used to, either being tall or short or heavy-set or thin or things like that, will just manifest through the consciousness of the soul that's directing the forming of that physical body. And we see similarities in physical traits between Lincoln and Lindbergh. They were almost exactly the same height and weight. They were both, Lindbergh was called slim and Lincoln was thin to the very end of his life. They both had this habit of pushing their lower lip out as if in deep thought. They had a forehead that was similar shape, and their eyes were almost exactly the same. In fact, if you look at photographs and you compare the eyes of the two men, you start to see this connection between the two. Yogananda used to ascribe to that thought that the eyes are the window of the soul. And their eyes were almost exactly the same color, but there's a look in the eye that's unique. It's like a thumbprint. It can't be duplicated. And when you see that same look looking out from two people's eyes, then you see evidence there of reincarnation. But they had this tendency to look at people as if from a distance, as if they were still a Himalayan yogi sitting up in a cave, looking at mankind from up above. And they had that tendency to sort of study people that way. They also used to hunch their shoulders. They both had these physical correlations that are in one of the early chapters of my book.
In today's science, when we know so much, or we're starting to learn about genetics and DNA, do you think that in the future we'll be able to trace the actual existence of somebody prior to their physical being here on Earth a second or third or fourth time by DNA?
Well, there's a problem with that is that the DNA exists on the physical plane, whereas what we're talking about is a spiritual reality. And I think the spiritual realm transcends the physical. It can make use of it, but it can't be defined by. You can't really quite nail it down. That's why we try so hard to find convincing, conclusive physical evidence in this physical world of a spiritual reality, but you never can get it right to a point where everyone would have to agree, that was absolutely true. And so I don't think it would be possible really to make that sort of a conclusion using physical means.
Is there any way to prove the existence of reincarnation scientifically?
There was a man who worked on trying to use scientific methods to prove reincarnation. His name was Ian Stevenson, and he taught at the University of Virginia. And he wrote a number of studies where he went out into the field in different parts of the world and met young people who had memories, they said, of a past life. And he would use scientific methods to check these case studies and compare them. And it's a very fascinating and interesting study. But I think mine is also an interesting study because it shows evidence of reincarnation in the pages of history, connections that people had never known of, and it's really quite amazing. But again, as I say, I don't think it would be possible to create to find a fine or conclusive evidence of reincarnation in the physical world.
So where do we look for this proof?
Well, as I did, you have to look in the connections between the two people, studying their lives, studying their physical bodies, studying their habits, their way of looking at things. I think for my book, especially, the thing that is most, that makes the strongest gives the strongest evidence for reincarnation is the spiritual, because that's the deepest part of who and what we are. When somebody reincarnates, if they're an angel in one lifetime, they won't be a devil in the next. And you see in the lives of Lincoln and Lindbergh that they both had these habits, these spiritual habits that one would develop if he were a Himalayan yogi in a past life. I take you through the deeper teachings of yoga, especially the central path of yoga, which was written about many thousands of years ago by a great sage named Patanjali. And these are all moral guidelines. And when you go through and you compare the two men, you see that they're pretty much exactly the same, that they had the same virtues and the same kind of virtues and pretty much to the exact same degree. Just to give you one example, both men were so utterly truthful, especially Lindbergh when he was a young man, and Lincoln pretty much all his life, that they were shocked if anybody were to lie to them. Lincoln had an agreement with Stephen Douglas that neither would campaign during a certain time when they were both having their debates in Illinois. And Douglas broke his word and gave his speech, and Lincoln was just utterly shocked by that, and he never quite trusted Douglas after that. And, when Charles Lindbergh had flown the Atlantic, he had these connections with certain reporters that said, give me your story, and then I'll write it down just as you tell it to me. And then when Lindbergh would read the story in the newspapers, he was utterly shocked to read a story that was completely different from what he had said. That was dramatized, the things he said that he had said and he hadn't, and so on. And it was just beyond his conception that someone wouldn't speak the exact truth. And so, again, here you see this habit of consciousness, this continuation of consciousness from one lifetime to the next.
Richard, stand by. You and I have to take our final break for this hour. Richard Salva is our special guest. He's the author of Soul Journey from Lincoln to Lindbergh. His website is www.lincolnreincarnation.com. And still to come on tonight's show, we're going to be speaking to Bruce Caldwell, and our final guest tonight is going to be Susan Titus. My name's Rob McConnell. This is the X Zone, and I'll be back with our special guest, Richard Salva, on the other side of this commercial break as the X Zone continues live and around the world from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, exclusively on Talkstar.
Yo, let me bust the funky lyrics.
Hi, this is Rob McConnell, just letting you know that the X Chronicles newspaper is now available online at www.xzonebookclub.com. All past editions and current editions of the X Chronicles newspaper are available for 99 cents. That's www.xzonebookclub.com, and that's 99 cents US per edition. And don't forget, the X Zone store is now open as well for all of your X Zone Nation merchandise. www.thexzonestore.com. With each new extreme weather event or terrorist act, it becomes increasingly obvious that we live in uncertain and challenging times. We all buy car insurance. Why not collapse and catastrophe insurance? Matthew Stein, an MIT-trained engineer and green builder, has written 2 outstanding books to help people prepare, plan for, and deal with everything from minor situations lasting a few days to full-on collapse. Matt's first book, When Technology Fails, is a manual for self-reliance, sustainable living, and surviving the long emergency. This massive book covers the gamut from first aid and emergency preparedness to alternative healing, renewable energy, primitive living skills, and 18th century technologies that could be critical to your comfort and survival in a long-lasting crisis. Matt's second book, When Disaster Strikes, is a comprehensive emergency preparedness handbook and survival guide. When Disaster Strikes is an essential item for every family's go bag. Both books are available at all usual sources. There's a wealth of totally free information posted at whentechfails.com, and author-signed copies may be purchased at mattstein.com. That's www.whentechfails.com. whentechfails.com and www.matstein.com.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Richard Salva is our special guest this hour. We're talking about his book. It's entitled Soul Journey from Lincoln to Lindbergh, www.lincolnreincarnation.com. Richard, if the premise of your book is true, then why did Lincoln reincarnate as Lindbergh?
Well, you know, when Abraham Lincoln died, he had just completed his life mission, as it were. He'd held the country together through the Civil War. He'd started the process, at least, of freeing all the slaves by issuing the Emancipation Proclamation. And, in fact, we were talking about the end of the war. It had been only about a week or so since Robert E. Lee had signed the treaty at Appomattox before Abraham Lincoln was shot and killed. There were still men dying on the battlefield, but the war was essentially over. And so his life mission, if you will, you look at his life and it just seems like it ended so suddenly. What might have happened after that? What might he have earned? What acclaim might have come his way? What love might have been showered on him in his second presidency and at the end of his life? We may never know. But he certainly earned those sort of rewards in his lifetime. And in fact, I often say to people that I felt like he left that physical body with a big payment due stamped on his forehead. And then you see in the life of Charles Lindbergh, at a very young age, he flew the Atlantic, and people just went crazy over him. They just showered him with affection and adoration. They said he was like a new Hercules or so on. They compared him favorably with Abraham Lincoln and other great giants of history, and this affection for him and this love for him lasted throughout his life. Many people still, even at the end of his life, he still receive that sort of adoration. So you see that Abraham Lincoln needed to come back to receive the payment that he was due karmically for his good deeds in his life as Charles Lindbergh.
Did Lindbergh give any indication that he knew he had been Abraham Lincoln?
You know, I look for that because as Yogananda had said, this was an advanced soul. And you talked about scientific evidence of reincarnation, but Yogananda, even thinking of historical evidence, he didn't search libraries for case studies of people who had similarities in their lifetime before he made that pronouncement about Lincoln and Lindbergh. He just intuited it deeply within. Somebody, the teachings in India and in Hinduism and yoga are that if you can go deep enough into meditation, when you can start to see that this physical body is not your reality, then you can realize other physical bodies that you've inhabited and other lessons that you've learned in other lifetimes. And so for these two men, you can see those sort of connections.
Richard, one quick question. Is your book proof of reincarnation?
Well, we spoke of that. Is it possible to find categorical proof? And as I said, I believe it's possible in the physical world, but I think my book comes pretty close. I've done a study of pretty much all the reincarnation books out there, and many of them are quite fascinating, but I don't think any of them give quite as powerful an argument for the possibility of reincarnation as mine does.
Richard, thank you very much for joining us. Continued success, and look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Good night, sir. Richard Salva, www.lincolnreincarnation.com. He is the author of Soul Journey from Lincoln to Lindbergh. When we come back from the news at the top of the hour, Bruce Goldwell is going to be with me. This guy has a fascinating story. It's basically